and I think there was a mix up, and today we'll actually be talking about how to synthesize a research and taking one method out of the different ways you can synthesize your research and talk about it, which is the personas. And I know that you know, or maybe they've taught you everything about user research. But moving forward, I want to quickly touch this particular aspect of user research that has to do with synthesizing and how to make sense of your data. During your research phase, you've got piles of data gathered from the inspiring empathy research and everything that you've done, from your interviews, everything during the research phase. But those are just raw data. You need to, synthesize and simplify your research. You simplifying it would help you make sense of it when you are presenting to the stakeholders, when you are defining when you are defining how you want to design or develop your product. Bringing all this together, I can say that there are varieties of interesting methods to help you synthesize all the data that you've gathered during your research. There is some in design thinking. We know that the first phase in design thinking is the research phase, which is the empathize phase. And after the whole thing, you have to move to the define phase. And this phase is what we are at the moment, which is the define phase. That is where you'll be able to use several available methods to help you synthesize and summarize your understanding of who you are designing for and what your users really need. Let's say for example, we can talk about telling user stories, drawing your empathy map, drawing your customer user journey, your personas, your scenarios, your points of view, which is also the problem statements. These are the things that you have to do at the define stage. You have your raw data, you want to define you want to synthesize all the research that you've gathered. Now, out of all these listed ways that you can synthesize your research, I will just be explaining briefly on everything, but we'll actually be looking at one method out of all the listed methods that I have here, and which is the personas. So I want to start with the user story. I will just touch all these things briefly just to explain it so that you actually understand what I'm trying to say. When you have all your data, mapping helps you plot experiences, it helps you plot your customer journeys. It helps you plot your thought process. What are the feelings that you actually have? Like, what are the things that you gathered? How do you see your users? Are they actually in line when you are doing your research? Are they actually in line with who your target audience are when you are actually developed, or when the stakeholders shared the business plan with you? Now, this user story is more of you telling compelling stories, and we can say that they are just short stories that aim to insert your persona. That is what user story is all about. And you can get the root of the who, the what, and why of the situation. But for the empathy mapping, we could say that the empathy map helps you to understand your user's needs. I don't know if you've actually touched this during the user research phase. Maybe they've explained it to you briefly, but I will just touch this briefly. The empathy map is just for you to understand how your users feel. From the word empathy, you want to understand their pain points, you want to understand how they feel, right? Why personas, that happen to be what we actually be looking at today, they are fictional characters based on your research. So they are just like fictional characters that you create to understand your user's needs, their behaviors and goals. And we also have scenarios, and scenarios are actually from user stories. Then we have points of view. Point of view is the same thing as problem statement. You understand your problem statement. Now you want to draw how might we questions from your problem statement, which is from your point of view. So this actually helps you. It is at this stage when you are drawing or trying to frame your POV with how might we questions that you now move to the third stage, which I want actually, which is the ideation stage. But I won't be touching that. Today we'll just be focusing on personas. So these are the ways, or these are the methods that you can define, that can help you to define or synthesize your research. Do you have any question on this before I move to the next part? Do you have anything you want to ask before we move forward? Are we good? Can I continue? Please, I need the response.
You can continue.
Okay, fine.
Hello.
What do you say?
I do have
Yes,
a
yes, I can
question,
hear.
and it's in the user story. So I wanted to ask that,
What do you say?
are you saying that I wanted
Can
to
you
ask
hear
a
me?
question concerning. Hello, I can hear you. Hello? 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 Me now. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Please take it
My
again.
question is
Yes,
concerning
I
the
can hear
user.
you.
Okay, my question is concerning the user stories. So I wanted to ask that, do we have the user story before we start this our personals and our empathy? Like, do we have these stories? And if we are going to be having the stories before that, do we like like, where do we get our user story from? Is it from the research results that we had? That's when we now start to build up a story. I don't know if you
Yes,
get my question.
I'm not sure I get your point, but I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to say clearly. Are you saying that how do you get your user stories?
Yes, exactly. And I wanted to ask if the user stories comes before the empathy map and the personals.
Oh, okay. Yes. Actually, there is no particular, should I say, flow. But of course, user stories come first, because after getting your research, after the whole thing, like after gathering all your research, there are ways for you to put your user stories, like that can just think about user stories, like stories that made you curious. And formulating this would help you put your idea to your team. You can't tell, you don't, if you don't have a compelling user story, how do you want to draw out your personas? How do you want to draw out your empathy mapping? So of course, user stories comes first. Like I see it as after your research, you should be able to, tell a compelling and inspiring stories from what you've actually heard from the people you are designing for. Do you get? So I would say that they are the user stories become parts of your collective, like some of the things, like some of the important things that you shouldn't actually ignore when you are at the define phase. Because after your empathy phase, you want to be able to define it. And how do you want to define without telling story? So you get it from your research that you've done, and the goal is actually to build a repository of stories for your team. You want to draw out, like you want to tell a story that you'll be able to present and share with your team and be like, okay, this is how our users are feeling. It will capture those ideas and feelings, and this will actually help you to sync with your team better. I don't know if I explained that, or you want me to
Yes,
talk
yes, I
more?
do understand. I do understand. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So we actually be picking one out of these ones that I listed. Kindly note that these are not just the only ways for you to define or synthesize your research. There are several ways, but being a user researcher, I see this as the important methods that you can use to synthesize your research or define your research. So let's start with the first one, which is personnel. I don't know if any of you, I don't know if you are familiar with the word user personnel. Has anyone ever heard of the word user personnel? Have you done it before? Can anyone just, give me what you think, or what are the approach, or how do you do your own user personnel before I move forward to explaining what user personnel is? Who want to try, or we should just go ahead? Okay. I think that is enough. So let's just go ahead. So I said one of the methods that you can use to define your research is user personnel. What exactly is user personnel? I've seen like different ways, and I've seen a lot of user personnel online, and I've seen like several ways or different ways that people come up with all this user personnel. User personnel is actually a fictional representation of your ideal customer. You have your target audience, you have your ideal users. No matter how large your database of users are, I'm very sure that you have actually the ideal one, the ones that you actually want to build your products for. And as a UX designer, you start the design product process by conducting user research. That is building empathy with your target users, right? And identifying exactly what they need from the products you are designing. So this personnel is generally based on this user research. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so it is generally based on this research that you've done, and you created their needs. You already know their needs. You've their goals. You understand their behavior pattern and all that. Now, this is just like a fictional representation of your ideal customer. They are not actually your ideal customer, but you're actually trying to represent them in a graphical or in a drawing way. Not like, okay, this is Tunji and this guy here is our ideal customer. So your user persona is actually your fictional representation of who your customer is. And the whole point of user personas is that for you, it's like they are memorable, actionable, and distinct from one another. It is normal for you as a designer when you are doing your research to have multiple user persona. I've worked on a product where the products actually have like, I think 6 personas. I can share it after the whole class. So they actually have like 6 personas. But out of these 6 personas, they are main or their primary personas, because we actually divided it into 2. Out of these 6 personas, we actually have 3 core personas. Like, And when I was trying to come up with my user persona, I did persona for all these 6 categories. So knowing your ideal customer, knowing who you want to serve, knowing who your product is for would actually help you to, come up with your user persona. And that is what user persona is about. And we have why our user persona is important. I know that people can be thinking, okay, why do we actually need user persona since we know our target audience, who we are designing for? Do we really need user persona? Now, the first thing is build empathy. When you have a user persona, it helps you to build empathy within your with your users. It helps you to understand their pain points and also share it with everyone involved. Share it with your team so that they can understand who you're actually building for. It is one thing for a designer to know who you are designing for, but you still need to communicate it to your team. So empathy is a core value if designers want to make something that is good for the people who are going to use it. So personas help designers to create understanding and empathy with the end users. You have to gain a perspective similar to the user, trying to identify what the users actually want, what their real problem is all about, how you can solve it and all. That is the first one, which is building empathy. And another reason why user personas are very important is it provides direction for making design decisions. One of your goals aside building empathy is to shape product strategy. Yes, you are a designer, you are a UX designer, but it doesn't mean that you are only building for the users. Another thing that is important is understanding the business goals. If peradventure when you are doing your research and you're trying to analyze your research is not in line with the business goals, you know that there is need for you to actually, meet with the stakeholders, present it to them. And that is why it is good to synthesize your data, because you're not going to be presenting raw data. You have to be able to, show them the user personas, show them the customer journey, show them user stories, show them the problem statements and how might we that you have from your problem statement. So these user persona help designers to shape product strategy and accompanying it during the usability testing. If you have a deep understanding of your user behavior and needs, it makes it possible to define who a product is being created for and what is necessary or unnecessary for them from a user-centered point of view. Because of course, the approach that I'm actually looking at is user-centered. Though from my own perspective, I see it as human-centered, not user-centered. So let's just continue from that. Then another one is it helps you to communicate research findings. Like I said earlier, that you only have the raw data. Communicating your research findings is another thing, which is actually important. You are not supposed to present raw data to your stakeholders or your team. So most designers work in multidisciplinary teams that have team members with different experience and points of view. Now, having or working in a multidisciplinary team, you should be able to, bring everyone on the same page in terms of design decisions, because you have different people with different points of view. You have the engineers, you have the marketers, you have the customer success team, you have you are working with several people. Now, putting or bringing them together on the same page to ensure that you guys make the same, so that it will be helpful for you when making your design decisions, is when you communicate your research findings very well. And these are just ways, these are just the importance of user personas that I have. Please neglect the last one. So building empathy with your users to help you to build empathy and understand their pain points, because those are the things that you'll be listing out. Then to help you to provide direction for making the design decisions, which is important to understand the product strategy and all. Then it helps you to communicate research findings, which means having your personnel, you'll be able to show it and present it to your stakeholders, your team, and everyone that is actually involved in building the product. I can say that like additional benefits of creating personas, these are just like additional benefits, not actually still in line with what I have here, like understanding who your users are in a more concrete way. So it's more like me just explaining these 3 listed points here. So they are actually the same. Then clearly describe to your team who you are building features for. That is where we have communicate research findings. And yes, so another one is, please let me know if I am moving too fast so that I'll be able to slow down a bit. Are we good? Okay, fine. So another thing is that you actually need to consider, because user persona is not just something that after your research you just come up with like, okay, I have this, I have this. You need to be able to know how user persona works. It's not something that you'll be able to develop in just 1 hour or 30 minutes. If you actually have that data, it's not something that you should. It is better for you to not do it at all than do a wrong user persona, right? So how a user persona works basically is knowing your users makes it easier to remember who you are designing for. You've done your research, you know who you're. In fact, research is like simplifies everything that you need to do, from defining to ideation and all. So you knowing who your users are, it makes it easier for you to remember who you are designing for. Because as the user of the other product might not be the users of your own. Please understand that. Users of other products are not the users of your own. They might not. Maybe not like they are not, but they might not be the users of your own products. So user personas turn the user into an actual person you can get to know. And there are actually, ways that you can make your user persona works is like we have it here, turns the abstract concept of user into a person with thoughts and emotions, like I said. Then helps you know who you are designing for, represents a group of users with similar goals and characteristics. This person represents a group of users. The persona that you are creating, they represent a group of users who share similar characteristics and goals. You just want to, let's say you want to have just one user persona, right? This one persona that you want to create want to represent the group of users. And when it comes to simple updates, being on the same page as the user can prevent backlashes against updates. You're already on the same page with your user. You already know what they want. It will also dictate how best to solve certain design problems, because you already understand what they want, and the goal will dictate the best design patterns for your app, your website, or your product. So, to provide the best user experience. If you don't understand or you don't know how it works, and because you assume that these are the set of people that we want to design for, the personnel will actually be what would actually guide any design decision that you want to make. Your design decisions are tied to your user personnel, because you know that this personnel is representing who we want to design for. So now that thought is having that document or having that the graphic of that user personnel. Anytime you want to make a design decision, you have to check through their behavior, check through their pain points, their frustrations, their goals. Now if you have a wrong user personnel, that means you make a bad or a wrong design decisions. And a design decision, any bad or wrong design decisions, would have effects on the products that you are building, would have effects on the business return on investments, because at the end of the day, you'll see it as you just wasting time or wasting everybody's time. And there is something that actually struck me anytime I want to do a research is it is better not to do research at all, right, than for you to do a bad research. It is better for you not to, because if you do a bad research, you have a wrong personnel, you have a wrong design decisions, which is like more like off what the business goals are. Are we still like, can I continue? Okay, fine. So as a UX designer, I know it is very important to know the types of user personas. We have different types of user personas. But to me, anytime I want to draw my user personas, I only categorize them into these three personas, like these three types, which is we have proto personas, we have the qualitative personas, and we have the statistical personas. See the proto personas as personnel with no research, with no new research. I would say proto personas are just personas that you draw out from your brainstorming session with the stakeholders, which means no raw data, kind of as like you do it based on assumption about who your users are, but not based on research or new research. That is proto personas. So all the these personas, I create this persona based on assumption. They are proto personas. It is fine to have proto personas. Proto personas can come before your research. It can come, before you even analyze your research. It can come in when you meet with your stakeholders, because these are just based on, they are the team's existing assumptions. You meet with your stakeholders, you guys talked about a particular problem, a particular feature that you want to introduce, right? From your stakeholders or from the brainstorming session, as a UX designer, you started thinking about who your users are. If you should go back to your board and you try to, write out or sketch out your personas, that is a proto persona, because they are based on assumptions. They are not actually based on raw facts or data. So we can call that proto personas with no research, based on assumptions. Now, what is now qualitative personas? We can say that qualitative personas are based on small sample qualitative research. And when we are talking about qualitative research, I know that your qualitative research, you know what your qualitative research is. I really don't want to go into that because I don't want to spend more time on this. So we are talking about your personas based on small sample qualitative research, such as interviews, the interviews that you've done during your research phase, the usability tests that you've done during your research during your research or after your product, all of those things that you put together, that they are based on data. That is qualitative personas. And this one are sample based. We said proto personas are based on assumptions, maybe during your brainstorming session with the stakeholders. Now, the last one, which is statistical personas, is they are actually initial qualitative research that informs a survey instrument. This one is kind of larger, not small sample like qualitative, right? Let's say you send out, this one is large based, like large sample size, while qualitative is small sample size. Now, if you are talking about small sample size, we're talking about interviews, qualitative usability test. Of course, you can't be running usability test for 30 people. It's not possible. But for statistical personas, that is where you have large sample size. You have, like, let's say you send out a survey, right? You send out a survey, you know that you're looking at probably gathering like 200 responses, 500 responses, or that. That's a statistical personnel, right? This one is large based. They are the personnel that you draw out from large sample size. While qualitative personnel are personnel that you draw out from small sample size. Proto personnel are personnel based on assumptions with no research or with no new research. Are we clear on that? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing is how to use.
Sorry, please. Can I ask a question as regards it, or I should wait till when we're done?
Maybe you should wait. So
Okay.
we
All
have
right.
a session, yes. So you can just write it down. Thank you.
All right. All right.
Okay. So when to use a user personnel? Though sometimes, maybe not all, I don't create user personnel all the time. It depends on the type of research or the type of data that I gathered or the kind of problem or issue that we are trying to find out. So when you are designing a new cooking app, for example, your main idea is to help people compile a list of healthy recipes for during the week, right? Then it eats you. People generally have varying amounts of time on their hands. Some money in their pockets, motivation, or skills when it comes to cooking. So in these aspects, the app should therefore be tailored to its main users. Now, when to use a user personnel is to avoid generalization. You don't seek to serve the masses. You have to focus on your target audience or your target users. I've said it several times, like people saying, this product is for everybody, is for, even if it is a fintech app, that everyone wants to save. But in as much as it's for savings and investments, right? Your target audience or your main users let's say underrepresented, or like let's say people in underrepresented region. Do you get it? Yes, it's for everyone can use it to save, but for you to create your personnel, for you to narrow your research down, understanding that okay, this particular fintech app is for underrepresented group of people. Now, that is who you are going to focus on when you want to create your user personnel. Because you want to create personnel for underrepresented group of people. You want to draw out pain points for this set of people, not for everybody. Then it capture the right user, focus on specific user group, otherwise you could lose them all. Like I said, like no research at all is better than doing bad research. So if you capture the right user, you avoid generalization. Like, okay, it is a fintech, it's for everyone, but it's not for everybody. You still have to narrow it down. And the right moment to use it. The key moment to create your user persona is in the pre-design phase. Before you even start design at all, which is the second stage that we call the define stage. After your empathy stage, which is the first stage. So it's might ask them questions about their lifestyles, their hobbies, all those kind of things. That is how or when to use a user personnel. Sorry, when to use a user personnel, rather. So it's your main thing is the time to create a user personnel is before the design begins, not after. The time to use this user personnel is during the design stage, not in the development stage. That is when to use it. And sticking to this rule will not just save you time and money, but also ensure your product is a hit with your users. It is not even about time and money. It's about you ensuring that this product is a hit with your users. So know that it is done before the design begins, not after. And of course, it is at the design stage, not the development stage. It is not until you now get to the development stage, you now start drawing out your user personas. And yeah, how user personas help design. There are several ways user personas help design, but it turns the abstract concept of user into a person with thoughts and emotions, like I said. It helps you know who you are designing for. I mentioned that. Then represents a group of users with similar goals and characteristics. Helps you get to know users more closely to create better experiences. So these are the ways that user personas help you design. Now, another question is, is user persona a quantitative or qualitative approach? I will still get to a point where I would explain assumption and database persona. But the first thing is it quantitative or qualitative approach? I know many wonder about the approach to research they should undertake when researching a user persona. I know that a lot of people will think, okay, should it be quantitative? Should it be qualitative? The answer is that usually the best user personas are created out of both inputs. If you want to create the best user persona, you have to combine the two. Now, there's something called mixed methods in UX, in user research. There's something called mixed methods. Now, mixed methods is the combination of quantitative research and qualitative research. So these methods have been proven to be effective rather than just sticking to one approach. It is better to, if you have the time, if you have the resources, it is better to combine it.
Sorry, I can't hear anything. Hello?
Because the quantitative data will let you understand your user. Well,
Hi, Mike. We lost you for a while. We couldn't hear you.
oh my God. Okay. So I said that why should we shun one method for another when you can actually combine the two methods? And it has been proven that mixed methods happen to be the best approach if you want to do your research or you want to create a persona or anything. Mixed method is the way, it's the method of you combining both qualitative and quantitative research. Quantitative data can make your user personas more understandable. You'll be able to understand your user persona with quantitative data. But qualitative data will make them more believable and will help your team identify with them on a personal level. That is qualitative. Because doing interviews, having one-on-one session, having open questions, direct observation will let you relate to it clearly. So you'll be trying to gather as much as possible data for quantitative testing, but for qualitative you actually need you need quality data. You want to feel them. So this, I would say that combining the two is the best approach. You can do the two if there is time, if there is resources, and all that. So why not combine the two instead of doing just one approach to draw your user persona? So we have different, should I say, we have assumption persona and we also have database. These two types of personas, aside the ones that we mentioned, they are actually more of, we say assumption personnel are generally a mix of primary and secondary research. I won't be talking about this primary or secondary research because I know that you've been taught, like you guys have done research. So, and I believe, or I want to assume, but then I will still empathize with you when we get to the Q&A to understand, to know if you understand it and not just assume that you know it. So, but for now, I would assume that you know what primary research or secondary research is. So assumption personnel are generally a mix of primary and secondary research. And assumption is about your users. So this type is a good choice when you don't have a whole lot of data about your users. And you need a more concrete idea of who your real users are. For example, you want to design. This scenario actually happens anytime you are working on a SaaS or an enterprise SaaS solution. I know that SaaS solution is difficult to get real users. Or let me say any B2B generally. B2B is business to business. See it as a solution for businesses, not solutions for customers. So we have B2B, we have B2C. We have SaaS. That one is software as a solution or as a clinical. So this SaaS or this enterprise, it's kind of hard to get a whole, when you're working on an enterprise SaaS solution, or let me say you are working on a B2B product, it is always hard to get data about your users. Now, at this point, you can mix primary and secondary research, and this is where we have assumption personnel. And that is where we talked about proto-personnel, if you can remember proto-personnel, based on assumptions with your stakeholders, right? Or maybe during your brainstorming session. Then another one is the database personnel. They are almost entirely created by transcribing primary and secondary data with little to no assumptions. And we can say that the first three personnel that we talked about earlier can be classified into assumption and database. Assumption sits as proto-personnel, and the other two, which is qualitative and statistical, sits as database personnel. Because at this point, you are drawing out your personnel based on research data, based on the data that you've collected from either primary or secondary research, with little or no assumptions. And yes, so gathering data for your user personnel, spreadsheets. This one is just more of explaining, like once you generate enough data, you need to create a visual representation of it to make it easier on the eyes. Check it. And there are ways to do it. You can use a spreadsheet. You can use, you can use a spreadsheet. You can use empathy maps. You can, you can draw it out. So, and yes, how many users personnel should I create? Or how many user personnel should be created? You have your product, you've done your research, but when meeting with your stakeholders, you guys discussed or you discovered that you have several user personnel. You can have as many as possible, but one thing is, the less personnel you have, the easier it is to design for each one. And the less likely you are to end up with the dreaded product feature creep. I won't lie to you. If you have a lot of personnel, it will be hard for you when you want to make design decisions. It will be hard for you when you want to synthesize. In fact, you would, for every decision you want to make, you have to consider each of your personnel. Sometimes you may find that two groups can be fused into one user personnel if they share enough similar attributes. If you have 6 personnel listed, 2 can actually, come together to be one personnel if they share similar attributes. But in other cases, this may not be possible. It may not be possible all the time. So each user personnel will then represent your ideal user. I can share something with you where I created, was it 6? Yes, it's 6 personnel for this particular product that I'm working on. So when it comes to designing for more than one user personnel, it might be useful to think of a Venn diagram. I know that we all did Venn diagram, or you've done Venn diagram in your mathematics before, where some features of an app overlap. So you can actually draw out a Venn diagram. You know that the center point is that product. Now you have to draw a Venn diagram and look at where each of them overlap. This will actually help you, and it will help you to know which one to combine, and if it is not possible, you have to let it go. So, but then there is no specific number of personnel that should be created. It depends on your stakeholders, it depends on the product that you are building and who your audience or who the product is for. But then the less personnel you have, the easier it is to design, the easier it is to do research and draw out your conclusion and all. And yes, I think we're actually moving to the last part. Am I talking too much? Like, I mean, is the speed too high, or I should lower it? Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we
Yes,
can
we
hear
can
you.
hear you.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so if you want to start, let's say you've actually analyzed all that, you put all those checklists, everything I've mentioned. It is now time for you to do the actual work. You understand how it works. You understand the type of personnel that we have. You understand the reason why you need personnel. You understand how you should, where your user personnel comes from. That it comes from your research. Know that okay, this is for you to, be able to synthesize your research. You know how to make this happen. Now, how are you now going to create it? Collect the information about your users, right? Like, how do you feel like after this time for me to actually put in the real work? I put just 5 steps for you to create your user personas. Your user personas can be created in different ways, but it all depends on your budget, the type of project that you are doing, and the type of data designers are able to collect. So this is not actually restricted to a particular way, but all depends on the data that you are able to collect as a designer. So, but this is more like detailed step-by-step instructions on how to create a persona beyond everything I've said earlier. So the first one is for you to collect the information, collect the information about your users. And this first step is to conduct user research to understand the target audience, the mindset, motivations, and behaviors. So the most accurate personas are based on actual field research, right? So now in this part, it is in the case when it is impossible to interview, I'm talking about qualitative research this time around. In a situation whereby it is hard for you to interview or observe the real individuals, let's say time, money, all these things could be a factor, right? It is still possible for you to, you can use your quantitative method to collect the information about your users. And that is where we talk about surveys and all. So during this step, it is very important to avoid generating user personas. Users that don't have any relation to the actual user's reality, please just scrap it. And I will have to touch a bit about pre-screening when you want to do your research. when you are drawing out your research plan, which has been taught, when you are doing your research plan, when you want to draw your research plan, there is a phase or there is a particular point where you do screening, you conduct screening tests. Now, this screening test is not actually the interview. It's not actually the interview questions or the interview stage. It is for you to screen out those that are not actually your main users. You have a lot of people, you have a lot of database, you have a lot of people that you want to interview or carry your research on. But doing pre-screening helps you to, screen out those that are not the actual user. So if at this point you skipped your pre-screening, which I see it as an important step during your research plan, when you're drawing out your research plan, if you skipped it and you just carry out your interview, you are not, at that point, you are unable to screen out those that are not your actual users, because you can't tell me that all these users are your actual users. So you should be able to screen out. And this is where it is important that anything that happened during the research phase would have effects on the personnel and other stages of your products, right? So collect the information about your users, ensure you collect the right information. Then the second one is identify behavioral patterns for research data. The next step is analyzing research findings, like I said. And the goal during this step is to find patterns in user research. Once the research is finished, list all the behavioral variables, ways in which users' behaviors differed. Is very important because you are looking at their behavioral patterns. And the reason why this is important in user personnel is I can have the same status with someone, we can have the same knowledge, we can be of the same age, we can actually be of the same gender, we can be doing the same work, we can have the same bio, we can have the same frustrations, but we will definitely have different behavioral patterns. So it is actually important to be able to, understand and list out all the behavioral variables. Then, yes, create personas and prioritize them. It is important to assemble a persona's description. And here I'll be able to, the next slide, I will tell you things to actually put into your personas anytime you want to create your personas. So, Don Norman said that personas only need to be realistic, not real, not necessarily even accurate, as long as they accurately characterize blah 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 the user, wherever the user base. So it is not a must for it to be real at all. Your user personas should just need to be realistic. They are not even, in fact, they don't need to be accurate. Like, they don't need to be accurate. But in as much as it is in line with your user base, then you are good. Find scenarios of interaction and create user personas UX documentation. It is important. Personas have no value in and of themselves. So yes, you have to be able to document them. And that is where we talked about the graphical parts, where you draw it out, and that is the documentation part of it. And the last one is share your findings and obtain acceptance from the team. Please, it is important that you are the UX person, you are the UX researcher, you are the UX designer, but always ensure that all teams and stakeholders should have a positive association with personas and they should see the value in them. Let them see the value in the persona that you created. You are not just going to create persona for persona's sake. They should be able to, obtain acceptance from the team. So this way, it helps you to communicate effectively with your stakeholders. As people become familiar with the personas, they start talking about them as if they were actual people. So if they're actually familiar with the persona, you will see your stakeholder talking about this particular persona as if they are the actual people. If there is time for you, share your findings with them, not just within the design team. Share it with your stakeholder have a presentation time for you to share your slides, explain the personas and reason behind the personas and all that, and let them see the difference between the assumption and the data-driven personas. And well, the last one is building your user persona. How do you build your user persona? Things to actually put into consideration is their personality, their bio, motivations, their pain points, their behavior, like I said, and their goals. When creating the user persona, I would say that sometimes I don't actually like putting age or gender when I'm creating my user persona, because I've done it several times and I realized that only if this particular product is tied to age, is tied to you defining age, you defining gender. Age and gender has no effect on your user persona. The only time that age has effects is if the product's goal is tied to the user's age. But if it is not tied to the user's age, it is so unnecessary. Like so unnecessary. Things that you should focus on should be their needs and goals, should be their bio, their pain points, motivations, their behavioral patterns, and all that. If you can, or if you are able to deduce all this from the research that you've done, then that is fine. And I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to deduce this if you actually carry out your research properly. So building your user persona shouldn't be that hard, because you've done whether qualitative or quantitative research. And yeah, sorry, I think that's all. At this point, please neglect this. This is not. At this point, I would say that that is the end. But let me just say that personas are powerful tools. They should be done properly. Like you should do it like you are doing your, in fact, it is part of the important things to note. If you really want to do your personas, it's better to do it right than, just doing it anyhow, because they are the go-to method for identifying your user needs. So at this point, I would like to entertain questions. If you have questions, if you have contributions, if you have contrary opinion to what I have said, please, everything is welcome. So I can take your questions now. Someone wanted to ask something.
Yeah, my question before, I
Oh,
believe it has been answered, was that is it possible that someone uses both qualitative and quantitative persona together? That's like the prompt and the qualitative, yeah,
okay.
persona. Yes.
Yes, in fact, I see it as the effective approach to not only personnel to research. I am a fan of mixed methods. Do the two. I want to know the why and how, right? So if there is time, if there is enough resources, it is the best approach. So who else? Do we have any other one? Or if you feel you don't agree to everything I have said, you can if you feel you don't agree to everything I have said, then you can come up like counter my wait, I think I saw one question now. Can that person unmute, please?
Sorry. I don't know if you can hear me. Good evening.
Yes, I can
Okay.
clearly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I enjoyed it. So, my quick question. Quick question. I've had I've had some research, anyway, and I usually get confused on certain things. For
Okay.
instance, on the empathy, the design thinking process, on the empathy, I find it so difficult to get what should be under the empathy stage, what should be under the defined stage, and all that. So I don't know. Sometimes I I just say, okay, um, user journey map. I don't know. I'm confused about if it is under empathy or defined stage. So I don't know if you
If
can
what is
help
under
me.
empathy or
User journey map,
okay, if it is under empathy or
defined stage, or
yes,
ideation stage.
define.
Really confused.
Oh, okay. Empathy
Thank you.
mapping, user journey, user stories, personas, they are done during the define phase. Now, we have the stages of your design process, like your design process. And the first phase is your empathy phase, which is where you would do your research, where you understand your problem statement, do your research, focus on your users, focus on business, do all those kind of research. Now, this empathy mapping can be done only when you understand your users. And you can only understand your user during the research phase, which is the first stage. The second stage is the define stage, right? Which is the define phase. That is where empathy map comes in, personnel. For you to understand, right, like now this empathy mapping is like 4 quadrants. Like said, what are your users saying, or what did they say? Then we have did, we have thoughts, and we have felt, right? You've empathized with them. You understand their pain points. You already know their goals, right? You know their goals, you know their pain points, you know their motivation, you know what they want to do, you know what they said, right? Now, knowing all these things during the research, now that is why it is important for you when you are doing your research to pay attention to your users. That's why I always prefer qualitative, because if you do qualitative research, doing your empathy mapping will be easy, because it's just for you to put all the data that you've gathered into these 4 quadrants, where you have said, we have did, what did they do, what's their thoughts, and how do they feel. Gets. So it's more like you just putting the research that you've done into all this, and you can do it at the define phase. You doing it means you are defining it. You are defining the research that you've done. Is that clear? Like, it's different from user journey. Quite very different from user journey. Your empathy is for you to empathize with them. It's for you to know it's for you to reflect on what you've done at the research stage. And it's one method that will help you to define. In fact, I see it as one of the methods that can help you to define or synthesize your observation from your field work and research phase is empathy mapping. It will be hard for you to do empathy mapping if you carry out quantitative research. It will be hard. I won't lie to you. Because let's say quantitative methods, let's say you just send out your survey. How do you really want to empathize with them? How do you really want to know their thoughts? You can only assume based on what they will only tell you this is what, based on surveys, right? You won't actually feel it. You won't actually know what they won't actually want to do or what they say. Is that clear?
Yes,
Is that
yes,
clear?
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I said I want to, excuse me. Oh my God. I said I want to share, just present something that I did, like how I do my user personas, right? Excuse me. Like I said, I talked about.
Ma, I do have a question.
Can anyone hear me? I talked about different ways, or
Hello?
like, yeah,
Hello?
can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh my God. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you,
Yes, we can
but
hear you.
someone else is speaking.
Okay, let's ask.
So
I want
I
someone
actually
to ask.
wanted to ask a very quick question. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yes, you
Can you?
can continue.
All right. So
Yes.
concerning the motivation, so I wanted a clarification on that. So I was thinking that can there be a scenario whereby on your personal you don't have the motivations, or is it a must you have it on your personal no matter the product you are trying to design for or build?
Yes, it is a must. It is a
Okay.
must, no matter what. There must be
All right.
a motivation. Like, this is a scenario where I created, it's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, where I created 7 personas. Now, if you should look at my personas, it's quite, it depends. That's why I said that what you want to put on your personas depends on the project, the data that you gathered, and all. It is not all the time that you do your personas like this, right? It is not all the time. Sometimes you just need to focus. Like, oh God, this person should stop. Can my calls? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, it just came
Yes.
up.
Yes, we
Sorry,
can.
the call came in. Apologies. I'm actually done. So I'm just trying to explain the scenario where you have to create your user personas, right? Now, when I was doing this product, it was quite hard for me when I got to the main making design decisions and all, because we have 7 key users. So I had to streamline these 7 to who out of the 7 we should have, like, top 3 or top 4, or that we should actually, not like we would actually neglect the rest, but we should actually focus on this. So, like I said, it is not all the time that you have your personas look all, all this. Sometimes you just have to be straight to the point. Most times I don't even add age, gender to my personas. Straight to the point, straight to the data that I gathered, right? And sometimes just have to be like tabular form if I have a lot of things that I want to show. So basically, that is it about user personas. It shouldn't actually be like, this is the template that I want to follow. It shouldn't be rigid. It should be, flexible, based on what you want to achieve, based on the data that you gathered and all. So do we have, and let's say when you're trying to create a persona, you feel stuck, you don't really understand, you have to go back to the data that you gathered to understand it, or have to carry out another research. But then maybe something went wrong when you are, during your research phase. That is when you feel stuck, when you are doing your personnel. But if you actually gathered the right data, drawing your personnel, knowing their motivations won't be hard, knowing their pain points won't be hard, their needs and goals and all. So I think I've answered your question. Do we have anything? Do you have any question or any other thing you want us to touch before we call it a day? Can anyone hear me? Please, I want to be sure. Are we good?
I can hear you.
Are we good? Can I stop sharing? Are we good for the day? Or can we call it a day? Okay.
Sorry, excuse me, please.
47 p.m.
I was trying to unmute. It wasn't working. So
Okay.
I want to ask you a question. You shared your screen and showed an Excel sheet. Was that like, well, I saw some questions there. Like, did you answer those questions to create the personas, or how did that help you create your personas?
Okay, yes. So these are actually drawn out from the questions that I asked them during the research phase. So that's why I said that if you are able to do your research very well, you will know how you should synthesize your data. So because I actually had a lot of questions, a lot of information, I used Excel sheets to synthesize and put everything into. I know use the other method. I used that other one, like the Excel, to put all the information based on the questions that I asked. Do you get it? So
Okay.
there, I just put it like, what are their challenges? What are their challenges to me means pain points, right?
Yeah.
What are their challenges? Like, what are their challenges? I put it there according to each of the personas. So what are their challenges is the first, like one topic, but each of the personas, the executive, the e-commerce, the sales and all, I now put each of their challenges in each boxes. Do you get it?
Yes, I get now. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, but the last question is
Okay.
that story the same as affinity mapping.
Is what the same thing as affinity mapping?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Ah.
yes, I heard you like that.
You said is affinity mapping the same as what?
As user
Oh.
story.
Can you hear me? Ha.
Yes, I
Hello?
can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I think I can hear you now. You are now audible. Before I couldn't hear you before.
Hello?
Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can anyone hear what I'm saying?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, me too. I can hear you. I think I can hear him.
Yes, I said it's affinity mapping, same as user story.
Well, not the same, actually, but parts of affinity mapping, affinity diagram. I can put that together. So we can, like I said, is user stories is you putting compelling stories to your team, writing everything down and presenting it to your team, right? Why? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so affinity diagrams, affinity mapping. Let me say affinity is just for you to synthesize. Like I see it as wait for you to synthesize your large amount of data, and that is where user stories come into. User stories fall under it. Mind diagram or mind mapping is also kind of similar to it. But then affinity mapping is also called affinity diagram, but it's more of you sorting qualitative information, not user stories. It is different. So affinity mapping, affinity diagram is you sorting, like categorizing and sorting qualitative information. And that is where we have card sorting, we have personas and all that. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
Yet, because
Or
when
you
you
need
start,
to come. Okay.
sorry, so when you started off, you were saying something about, you said something about like in having user story to come first immediately you finish collecting your data. So I was like,
It is not linear, right? Like I said, when I was saying it, the best approach that I said was it is good for you to let it comfort because it is not linear. You don't have to, it's not like everything is like steps or stages, like, okay, I do my user stories first, then my user persona, because everything comes on that defined stage, right?
okay.
Everything comes on that defined stage. So because everything comes on that defined stage, you can at the defined stage, right? There are some times where you don't even need all this, but noting the ones that are important. That's why there is no one-way process when it comes to analyzing or synthesizing your research data. Like, okay, it is a must for me to do empathy. It is it is a must for me to do affinity. It is a must for me to do all this and all that. Understanding when to use one and when to use each of these is very important, right? Maybe you just need to create your user stories, your customer journey, your user persona, your empathy mapping, and then move to, your user flow and all that. Maybe you just need to do all that. Maybe you don't need affinity mapping. Maybe you don't even need to draw out. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but maybe you don't even need to do empathy mapping, which is important, right? But knowing when to use each is very important. I just see affinity mapping as, taking sticky notes and all those kind of things and trying to group them. And I see it as synthesizing your data with sticky notes and all. I don't do that because I've actually happened to be the only designer we have worked, so there haven't been enough time for me to do affinity diagram and all that. Most times I focus on personas, user stories, empathy mapping, and user journey, customer journey. I think we are good for today. If you have any questions before I leave, you can ask. And if you feel probably you have something to ask, you can reach out to me on Slack. Let's have a lovely day, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.